the CIA's gangbanging racket through its money laundering ops here in Arizona. Several of whom are my customers, businesses I sold point-of-sale systems to. Turns out I have lots of friends in common with the guy who was the CIA's head gangbanger. Someone you might recognize. If you've ever seen the TV show Scandal, there's a shadowy covert intelligence agency called B6, which is an artistic rendition of the real thing called D6, the covert paramilitary wing of the CIA. Both in the show and in real life, the guy who runs covert operations is called Command and doesn't answer to anyone, not even the president. The purpose of the command role in real life was to organize black ops around an admiral, a top military leader that would be able to operate on 30 to 40-year time horizons as opposed to a series of presidents who operate on 4 to 8. Admiralty law in the military was created before a time of instantaneous communications. So it gives Navy admirals legal authority to order strikes without pre-approval from the president. It was intended to be used for situations where an enemy surprise attacks and the admiral needs to order an immediate response to avoid catastrophe. But over the years, it turned into a corrupt loophole used to order assassinations, with or without the consent of the elected president. Command also functions as a very important PR figurehead. All of the CIA mockingbirds in the mainstream media echo Command talking points verbatim, manufacturing the public consent they need to perpetuate their racket regime change wars. As I mentioned earlier, John McCain was Command, the guy secretly running D6. Almost everything our kangaroo news media tells us about McCain is false, especially the idea that he was some kind of patriotic veteran who was always putting his country first. In real life, he was actually a vicious war criminal and an opioid-addicted pedophile who saw himself as more of a European king than an American serviceman. That's why he constantly bragged about his royal ancestry and always used his power to enact the imperial agenda of those worthless European royals instead of using it to protect the interests of the American people. To understand how John McCain became Command, we need to understand a little bit about his background. John McCain was born on a military base in the Panama Canal Zone, land which had just been broken off from Colombia by a US-backed puppet revolution. While in Panama, he made friends with Colombian rebels that would assist him in future endeavors. Throughout his childhood, John McCain did terrible in school. All of his classmates and teachers thought he was a total prick. Like his obnoxious daughter, he was a snotty little brat who got everything handed to him on a silver platter because of who his powerful father was. One of the top admirals in the Navy, akin to something like military royalty. While in the Naval Academy, his teachers and classmates nicknamed him McNasty because he was such an arrogant jerk to everyone. He graduated almost last in his class, and the only reason he wasn't expelled is because his father was an admiral and could keep getting him out of trouble. After graduating, he bounced around in a few roles before deciding to become a fighter pilot. While he was training, he crashed 3 separate military jets, all due to pilot error. The first was off the coast of Texas. The second was in Spain when he was trying to showboat and accidentally took out a power line, causing a major power outage and sparking a major international incident. The third one was one of the military training jets his corrupt admiral father would let him use for personal weekend joyrides to see girlfriends and sporting events in other states. The McCain family perfectly epitomizes the insane nepotism corrupting our military. Any other pilot would have been grounded after one crash, but John was untouchable because his father was an admiral. On his very first deployment, John recklessly caused a major fire on the deck of the USS Forrestal that killed 134 of his fellow seamen. After again facing zero consequences for his actions, he was reassigned to another ship and back in action almost immediately. He was shot down in Vietnam after disobeying a direct stand-down order while trying to bomb a light bulb factory. The only reason they were able to shoot him down is because, once again, he wasn't following established Navy procedures and flying at the right altitude, which made him an easy target. He was severely injured in the crash and immediately turned on the United States in exchange for medical treatment. Being the son of the admiral that was running the war, Songbird McCain was able to provide mountains of invaluable intel to the Viet Cong, intel they used to shoot down many more American pilots. It was during this time that he developed his lifelong addiction to opioids. He was never actually tortured. That's just a lie made up to justify his treason. Because he was such a huge liability, providing so much damaging intel to the enemy, the Navy made a prisoner swap deal to get him out as soon as possible. But in the political power move of the century, John refused release until his fellow prisoners were freed. He pretended it was a selfless and patriotic act, and the news media ate it up hook, line, and sinker. But the real reason he refused to be released was because he wanted to avoid being court-martialed for treason. After a few years, he was eventually pardoned by President Nixon as part of a power struggle with military leaders over leaving the war in Vietnam. The instant he got home, he immediately ditched his wife and child who had been anxiously waiting years and years for his return and started an extramarital affair with Cindy Hensley, a crime family heiress from Arizona. Another great example of how ruthless and cold-hearted this guy was. After divorcing his first wife and remarrying Cindy Hensley in 1980, the stage was set. And he took over the D6 command role by default after his father died unexpectedly in 1981. His dad, John McCain II, or Admiral McCain, was the original command. Admiral McCain originally got the job when the OSS was restructured into the CIA in 1947 because he ran the Navy Signals Intelligence base in Italy after the war. At the time, the Navy was who ran all U.S. signals intelligence, so the CIA had to work through them to facilitate their spying and gangbanging. Admiral McCain, along with some of his other insanely corrupt admiral friends, were some of the first naive buffoons to buy into the idea of a new world order. They worked with vile racketeers like CIA Director John Dulles to import mobsters from places like Italy, Sicily, and Ireland and helped them take over many of America's major cities. When his son took over in 1981, he immediately shifted the focus away from the Italian and Irish mobsters his dad preferred and instead ramped up operations with his old amigos in the Colombian cartels, people he knew from his childhood in Panama, leading to the cocaine and crack epidemic throughout the 80s and 90s. He also ingratiated himself with the crime families of Arizona, like Charles Keating, and got himself into Congress by taking over the seat held by John Jacob Rhodes, the sketchy MI6 double agent who helped swift-boat President Nixon for leaving the war in Vietnam. After a couple of terms in Congress, he took over the Senate seat of another Nixon-sniping MI6 00 gangster named Barry Goldwater. Rhodes and Goldwater were the worthless, fake do-gooding rhinos of their day. Being in Congress provided John McCain the access and legal immunities he needed to run D6 efficiently. Another thing that really helped was the partnership he made with the Clintons that provided them assassins and saboteurs to cover for their corruption in exchange for favorable coverage in the media mafia he needed to cover for his corruption. This secret partnership enabled them to sell us out while enriching themselves with racket charities funded primarily by foreign robber barons. The Saudis, the Soroses, and the Rothschilds, aka the Eye, ushering in an unprecedented worldwide era of wanton corruption and sadistic violence. From El Salvador to Libya to Syria to Ukraine to Kyrgyzstan, John McCain sowed chaos, degeneracy, and violence everywhere he went. Especially out here in Arizona. Arizona is still very much the Wild West. Marauding Depression-era crime families operate with virtual impunity here to this very day. Families like the Hensleys, John McCain's in-laws who control commercial alcohol distribution, and families like the Bashas, who run a prominent local grocery store chain started in the 1930s. A huge amount of the drug and human trafficking happening in the United States today is facilitated directly by the Hensleys, Bashas, McCains, and their cartel partners like El Mayo, El Chapo, and the Los Salazar family who runs Sonora. Drug laws are aggressively enforced in Arizona, but anyone operating under the McCain Associates umbrella, aka the CIA umbrella, gets a free pass. Because if they do get caught, the corrupt FBI Phoenix field office will call and order local law enforcement to stand down. The FBI can even stand down other federal agencies like the Border Patrol. One call is all it takes. They can also force Border Patrol to release anyone they catch or hand over any evidence that they collect. And it's perfectly legal because the FBI by law has jurisdictional supremacy over everything. I have many confidential sources in the Border Patrol who are very frustrated with the alarming frequency of those stand-down orders, especially in the Yuma to Vegas corridor where most of the real traffic comes in. Agents that will be leading patrols about to catch a bunch of smugglers out in the desert who, right as they're about to make the grab, will get calls from the FBI standing them down and forcing them to back off. And we don't need to take their word for it to see that the federal government is totally unserious about stopping trafficking in the Yuma corridor. We could just look at the publicly available numbers. If you look here, you'll see that Border Patrol keeps way less agents in the Yuma corridor than in the Tucson corridor. They claim it's because there's less traffic coming through Yuma, but anyone who knows Arizona